right, I gotta repeat this because this is what I've been using for the sound test. I learned this in 8th grade, and they said we'll never forget it, and they're right. Here it goes. Van the apro with the charozota, the rauta marchas per ruta. En betere vine in sweet liquor, which virtue and flower is the end. Van Zephyrus is acre with the sweeter breath, inspired half in every holt and heath, the tender cropies and the younger sona, the half and the ram, half course rona. First 8 lines of the Canterbury Tales, Middle English.
Well, you see, now that you've said it for the 3rd time, I'm catching more of the words, more of the modern English in it.
And it's kind of fitting because this is supposed to be spring. This is April, and we've had snow on the ground, but it's supposed to be spring, but that's basically the setting of the first 8 lines. This has nothing to do with the subject of our podcast, but I thought it'd be interesting to start with.
What's the bird that sings cuckoo?
No, it's Bani Aparo with the Charazota. In April, when the rains start to fall, basically.
Okay.
Yeah. And you go through it, and it talks like the Hoff and the Ram. That's talking about Aries.
But the thing... okay. But the thing is, we're getting snow.
I know, we're getting snow. So, yeah, even though this is supposed to be the setting... Well, anyway. We're getting way off track here already. Welcome to Unearthly Upstate. This is Mari.
I am Matthew.
And today we're not discussing Middle English. Sorry about that. We are discussing Murderers Creek. And anyone familiar with New York is going to ask which one. Well, maybe both of them in one episode. Maybe we get enough recorded. We might split it into 2. But yes, there are 2 Murderers Creeks in New York. Yes, murders did happen on those bodies of water. Contrary to a local legend that surrounds both of them, they were not named Murderers Creek because of the murders that happened.
Not originally. Doesn't one take its name from the Dutch?
Yes, and that's the first one we're going to discuss today. To set both of them up, they're both, like I said, named Murderers Creek. Both of them, well, the one definitely down near Hudson in Athens, New York. The one in the Hudson area in Athens, New York, was originally called Murderers Kill, but that came from the Dutch. That was Moederkille or Moederkille. There's a little difference there. There's Moeder, and my pronunciation's horrible, and I apologize to my Dutch ancestors. Okay. So we got.
Are you being disgraced to your Dutch ancestors?
I am being a disgrace to my Dutch ancestors. So, okay, well, wait a minute. The Middle English kind of fits in, because Moederkille sounds like...
Yes.
It's very similar because Middle English, German, Dutch, all have the same language beginning. That is my Cliff Note logistics.
Cliff Notes, yes. Quiz on Friday, everyone.
Quiz on Friday. So, but what that means is Mother's Creek. Oh, and yes, I do have to make an apology. Producer Honey is not feeling too well, so you may hear her meowing a bit. She's got the sniffles bad, but right now she's loving my arm up, so just deal with it.
Well, she has improved over the last 24 hours.
She has. She got a little cold, that's all.
Bit of a sniffle.
All right, so this first one, which... All right, let me back up and begin. I'll read what I wrote for an introduction for this one, and I will apologize in advance. I will explain later. My research for this first one was hard to do, and I will explain why later, but let me start. There are 2 Murderers Creeks in New York. The one we'll talk about today is in the Hudson Valley region. It's near Athens, New York, and it does live up to its name. The cliff note of the tale is as follows. In August 1813, Sally Hamilton went missing. After 3 days of searching, her body was found under a bridge in the creek. Her murderer was never found, and since her death in the creek, it has been known as Murderers Creek. Well, let's go over the facts for this one. The creek was already called Murderers Creek before the death of Sally Hamilton, which we've established. The first reference to the name Murderers Kill is Dutch for creek, all right, is from July 18th, 1673. So at least 100 and some odd years before her death.
So we're going to a place way before New Amsterdam became New York.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
And it was listed in a deed of land to Whitney Harmes in 1788. The New York State Act stated, the south bank of the mouth of the Murderers' Kill in Lunenburg. Well, Lunenburg was the original name for Athens.
Okay.
The name of the creek is derived from Middle Dutch, Moderkille or Moderkille. Moderkille translates to Mother's Creek, and Moderkille is Muddy Creek. So it's either mother or muddy. Either of them work.
Now, which one did the drafters of the maps put on? Which name did they put on?
They started with the Murderers' Kill.
Okay.
And then it went to Murderers Creek.
Right.
So this was all way before her death.
So to this day, it's known as Murderers Creek.
Right. So in 1788, it was officially known as Murderers' Kill or Murderers Creek. And less than 30 years later, she was found dead. So the name had already been established by then.
Okay, going over the particulars of a homicide. She was killed when?
She was killed in 1813. Now I'm going to explain why this one kind of bugged me with research. There is proof Sally Hamilton existed. Her grave is in the Mount Hope Cemetery in Athens, and her date of death is listed as August 15th, 1813. But her age is listed anywhere from 17 to 20 years old. So there's a little difference there.
So young adult.
The problem I had was, as we will discuss this in more detail, is the most contemporary sources I could find. Now, I'm going to put a preface on this. I can only research via online. So that does limit some of my researching ability. Via online, the most contemporary resource I could find was written in 1860, 50 years after the events. So that is kind of a bit of a problem because I couldn't find actual contemporary, something written in 1813 about this.
Okay.
I'm not saying there isn't any. I mean, if I could have taken a drive down to Athens,
right.
talked to the Historical Society, they'd probably have the court documents.
Yeah, if you could, at this point, without the lockdown, go down to the ground zero there.
Right,
and,
right.
I'm sure they'd be happy to help you out down there.
Exactly.
With any of your research.
And you notice they said court documents? Yes, some people were arrested for her murder. But like I said, her murder was never found, so, sorry, spoiler.
And she was found 3 days after? Now, how did they determine that was 3 days?
Let's go over this.
All right.
I'm going to give you more of the details. We're kind of jumping ahead of ourselves. Okay.
Well, that's a given here at
Now, the night she disappeared, Sally had gone to visit her sister or neighbor. Now, again, depending on which account you talk to, the fact is she went to visit somebody. She left around 8 o'clock that evening from her visit and was never seen again until 3 days later. Okay,
so going by eyewitness accounts, that's how they pieced together the timeline.
Right.
They just found her body and then through the course of their investigation found out she was murdered 3 days previous.
Well, what they figured was
under the bridge.
She had left with some friends from that visit. They walked for about 20 minutes together and then they separated. Each going off to their own homes. Now, she was about 300 feet from her house where the last of her friends saw her, but she never made it home. Her friends made it home, but she never made it home. The next day, they started to look for her. Some reports say 2 days, most reports say 3 days later, her body was found under the bridge in the creek. Okay.
Okay, still with you.
Yeah. Now, one of the non-contemporary sources was from Oswego, the Times Journal in 1854, so this is 41 years after the murder. Said her body had been mutilated with a broken skull. And
her body's been mutilated and she was found with a broken skull?
Found with a broken skull. Okay. Great quote here from the newspaper article. But a medical examination proved that the murder was but a sequel to outrage. That language. They didn't report it directly, but it was implied that she may have been assaulted sexually.
Before or after the murder?
Yeah, see, that's never discussed.
You see,
if this was modern times, that would be a real big question there.
It takes an insurance investigator.
Or a true crime buff. Oh, I'm sorry about making that noise.
That's okay.
I'm having my first glass of wine
in a long
since
time.
January, so I'm enjoying it. Sorry, folks.
That's okay.
Hey, we're on lockdown. You gotta enjoy the simple things,
Absolutely.
All
Hence the junk food run.
Let's go back to the horrible crime. Later, let's have a discussion about how the modern take would be on this. But
sure.
So she's found dead. She's obviously been attacked, probably sexually. Her head was crushed, and she's found in the creek.
Persons of interest who might have motive.
Yes.
For putting an end to her life. Who were those people?
Well, let's see. First one who came out was 2 years later, whose name was Kavanaugh. He was acquitted and then drummed out of town.
Like you do.
Like you do. The reason was he was drummed downtown, probably as punishment for his ill looks, where he had the most villainous countenance I have ever seen. I'm not sure where that quote comes from, but I love it. And then there's another Kavanaugh, spelt differently, mentioned, who confessed to her murder, but he was found mentally ill,
right.
So they didn't take him seriously.
Mm-hmm.
It probably was one of these guys like, yeah, I did it, but...
Well, that's the thing. You've got somebody here who has confessed to the crime, but then they couldn't corroborate
probably couldn't corroborate his story. So, but being mentally ill, they probably thought, well, he's just saying it. You know, people do that a lot. There are people that will confess to any crime just to get the attention, and they've had nothing to do with it.
I cut off the finger, and I made my mark.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know,
Like
Gemini killer stuff.
Why they don't release a lot of details of some crimes
exactly.
is just to catch people like that. That's not a movie trope. They actually do that. So, but then you got two more people, a soldier named Sickler and his buddy, Mr. Lent. Now, Lent and Sickler and two other soldiers deserted from the Greenbush Barracks. They were from Albany, but they were on the other side of the river. We don't know what happens to the two guys that left with them. This is just Lent and Stickler. They stole a small boat, crossed the river. Okay.
So a compounding murder with
theft. Okay.
Theft. Okay. But the theft was before the subsequent murder, wasn't it?
They were traveling on foot when they passed a village where military exercises were in progress. Mm-hmm. And then they reached Athens. Lent testified that Stickler was the one who seized Sally and abused her. When she started screaming, that's when he said he bashed her head in and threw her over the bridge.
Oh.
And then...
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not up to speed here at all.
Mm-hmm.
They killed her, then stole the boat?
They stole the boat because
right.
they were on the other side of the river.
Right.
Stole the boat, went to the side of the river where Athens is.
Right.
Passed through one town where there was military exercises going on.
Well, they were deserters to begin with,
right? Went to Athens, found Sally, and according to... Oh, let me check my notes again, sorry. And according to Lent, Stickler was the one who grabbed her and abused her.
Ooh.
And then when she started screaming, he bashed her head in and threw her into the water.
Right.
Then they went to Catskills, New York, where they spent 2 nights in a barn before they got on a boat to New York City.
Okay.
There's some corroboration, but there's some major holes in their story.
Well, yeah, which is why I had difficulty following it.
Now, the owners of the boat did say it was stolen that night. So the owners were like, yes, the boat was stolen. There was an exercise in Coxsackie that day.
Watch how you say that.
I know. And I think I still pronounced it wrong. Sorry. The boat was stolen. There was a military exercise going on. So far that works, right? Now, there was some people who did claim they saw those 2 men around Catskill in New York at the time. Yeah, there's a few people who did this. And the captain who took them down to New York City even remembered them. He didn't remember them by name, but he remembered what they looked like. Okay, so that's corroboration, right?
Okay, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Objectively, yeah.
Yeah, this puts them in the area, right? U.S. military officers from Greenbush. According to the testimony of the officers, both Lent and Stickler were present at 9:00 p.m. the night Sally was murdered, and present again the morning at Reveille.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Now, what year was this again? 1813?
1813. But they didn't come out till about 1815, 1817. They didn't come out with the confession. Obviously, Lent came out with the confession. Stickler wasn't. I don't think he was interviewed at this point.
Right then. Okay, so America was at war at the time.
Right.
So, yeah, and they were both in the army.
Right. This would be the War of 1812.
War of 1812, yes, exactly.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, the military would be keeping a big eye on deserters.
Yes, they would be on high alert.
So... maybe they did desert, but they had the wrong days. But why? Well, we'll get into this.
It's a very sensitive situation to begin with.
Yeah.
You've got missing soldiers, murdered young women under train trestle?
Yeah.
And
well, bridge.
Or bridge, rather. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know. I kept imagining a train. Oh, sorry about that. I kept imagining a train trestle for some reason.
I think we're really jumping ahead because guess what? In the next one. So.
Okay.
There is a train involved in the next one.
I knew there was, between the two, reading the two stories, there are many parallels.
There
the
are
bridge
many
was
parallels.
One of them. So, that's where
Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay, so, all right. A lot of the things do match up, but then the main one, the big one, the one with records, not a bunch of hearsay or, I think it was those guys.
Oh, please,
really
let there be an objective record.
Really takes them out of the running for murderers. No, they were there when, they went to bed and they were there the next morning. Could they have left the barracks and came back? Yeah, but that doesn't corroborate some of the story.
Yeah.
Okay, if they had done that. So, Stickler was acquitted of murder and released. Lent, though, was convicted of perjury because of the military records.
Exactly.
Right. So this is...
they took the military's word over his.
Yep.
And,
now, though people do think Lent and Stickler were guilty of the crime, though. They think that the military may have had their dates wrong in the books.
Oh.
Well, now, you, reenactor, time periods to this point, would that have been possible?
Very much so. They've got techniques that have developed since then to keep, tabs on the recruits, the people who are being, trained. It's really dry stuff. Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
but
you have experience of what the military life is at that time. Yeah,
let me tell you, it was a lot easier to slip away.
Yeah.
And become a deserter back in 1813 than it is in 2020.
Oh yeah, definitely.
For sure. Yeah, they're a lot more hard-nosed about keeping tabs on the troops nowadays than they were then. So yeah, it would be easy. There would be gaps in the process of operations.
Right.
The base. Where a pair of prospective deserters could find themselves extricated from their service suddenly. Right. Best way you could back then would be to slip away at a time when you were put on sentry duty or picket duty. People who've been put on the guard suddenly turn up missing, either because they were killed or were taken away and then killed, but then just disappeared, just deserted. And there are many other opportunities, like if you're on extra duty or if you're going through your day-to-day duties as a soldier, finding an opportunity to slip away with your compatriots, and that's how it happened. There's an account of deserters at Fort Stanwix, after the siege. And at a time when things were pretty dire down there at Fort Stanwix, and 5 men slipped away and were then captured by the native allies of the United States, and then brought back to Fort Stanwix for execution. That was one of the, that was one of the stories I don't think that we told.
I don't think so either.
About Stanwix.
Yeah, we talked about the other scalping that happened there. But,
the scalping tree and the girls and the but and of course the wood collectors that went out and got offed by Joseph Brandt, presumably. This is all stuff for anyone who's interested, who's listening to this podcast, can look it up anyway, or go back to our previous
second
podcast.
Season.
Yeah. So there's a lot of opportunity for a soldier in 1813 to slip his cable.
Now here's where the biggest problem with this is. This record of these two men came out about 40, 50 years later. This supposedly all happened, but even one of the articles I have about this murder even states that's the closest they can get date-wise to when this happened. Now, apparently they confessed in either 1815 or 1817, but where's the record of that? So this person who was telling the story, did these guys even exist? I mean, like I said, if I could travel, I might go to the military museum in Albany and ask them, do you have the Greenbush Barracks records from 1813? And see if these guys even existed.
And here are two names.
Lent and Strickland.
Yeah, privates. Linton, Strickland.
Yeah, Strickland.
Yeah.
Now, there were... Here's some more to throw in at you. Okay? We have Sally's brother-in-law, Judge Nichols, stated some years before this memoir, which mentioned the two gentlemen, had been written, Stickler had made a confession on his role in the murder, but yet the judge couldn't say how he knew about that, or he wouldn't say how he knew about that. All right?
That's one thing about reading all the materials that you brought on board for this episode, and then going out, viewing videos, reading other materials about the subject. There's some vagaries here. Yeah.
And now, one of my favorites, though, comes from an inmate named Coffee. Coffee was in prison and was thrown into a cell with 11 other convicts, and one of them happened to be Lent. Coffee later recalled Lent, who continued to claim his innocence for perjury. Coffee said, I beheld myself in the secluded companion and the bedfellow of a murderer who had testified to his own guilt, priding himself on his innocence, although that very innocence, if proved, made him deserving of a giblet.
Ooh.
So here, was it Strickler? Or did Lent throw Strickler under the bus, so to speak, and he was the actual murderer? And then he just gets thrown in jail for perjury.
With this guy, whose account is this again?
Coffee. He was an inmate with Lent.
Sounds like a snitch.
Yeah, that happens a lot.
I mean, working Yeah.
It didn't say what Coffey was thrown in prison for. No, Lent was in there for perjury. We don't know what Coffey was in there for. But he obviously pegged Lent the murderer from their discussions.
Right.
Even though Lent said, "Oh no, I didn't actually, I didn't really purge her. I didn't really purge her." But you did. The way Coffey implied is he did, but it was who did the murder, not some of the other stuff. So that's why the murderer of Sally Hamilton was never caught. You had Kavanaugh spelled with a K and Kavanaugh spelled with a C, who could have been the same guy. But depending on the sources you look at, it sounds like two separate fellas. One ran out of town, the other was mentally ill. And then you had Lent and Strickland. So you had 4 suspects, but none of them, they didn't get enough evidence.
What about physical evidence?
This is 1813. Who would think of collecting something like that? My God, forensic science wasn't even going to be started until the late, 1860s, 1870s?
Something around, somewhere around
Okay, if this had happened in modern day, you know they would have collected DNA. You know the whole crime scene would have been cordoned off and there would have been a full investigation. If Kavanaugh came forward and he was mentally ill and just said, "Oh, I did this, I did this," they would be able to tell by his recounting of the event. And then when it came to Strickler and Lent, like you said, nowadays it would be much harder for them to desert. And if they did desert, I'm sure the military, not only would they be military records, but there'd probably be a GPS on that boat.
Yep. Absolutely. And these monks would probably be using their devices.
Exactly. So I think, it would have been an open and shut case in modern times. You see the trouble is trying to talk about her murder is so many of the accounts weren't put into public record until the 1840s. So how much of this was hearsay at that point? Like I said, you have a Kavanaugh with a K and a Kavanaugh with a C. Are they the same person?
There's such gaping holes.
There is. I mean, she died. We know she was murdered.
Useless.
The only fact that stays remain is she was found bludgeoned to death under the bridge.
That's
in
it.
1813.
And they didn't pay attention to anything else. None of the other details that were at the
Well, that's the
crime
only
scene.
thing we can say for sure happened, because you have the record of her death, you have where she's buried. I mean, that's a fact. But all this other stuff, how much of it is hearsay? How much of it is, stories after the fact? Yeah. Did this Kavanaugh even exist? I mean, the first one was run out of town with the one with the K. Well, it could be the same guy with the C. Did they just take advantage of the fact he was mentally ill and ran him out of town for this? I mean, there's different ways you could interpret this, But it is very interesting.
Nothing left for Arlo Guthrie Sr. to write a song about.
Really? But yeah, it's very interesting. Well, the only reason that there was so much attention paid to Sally Hamilton, well, I shouldn't say the only reason. It's still pretty sensational no matter who you are. But she came from one of the upper families in the area. Her family had been one of the founding families of the area. So that put a little more spin on it. But you would think you would find more newspaper articles from 1813 at the time. Like I said, they may exist. I just could not find them on my internet searching. And I do have some great sources. I mean, I don't just do a quick Google search. I have some other search engines I use that go into archives and stuff like that. So this wasn't a quick Google search at all.
I had to dig for this one. And,
and it's
still pretty shallow.
It left me pretty shallow. But it is interesting because when we get to the second Murderers Creek, it's just so interesting. There's so much that overlaps. And there's at least 100, well, no, I'm thinking here. There's about 80 years difference between the murders, too. So, I mean, it's interesting. It was difficult to really research this. It really was.
Well, I think it's due to the lack of detail that
Yeah.
was collected at the time.
Well, yeah.
And so, you've got these falsified statements,
right,
by the people who were supposedly there.
And it's really interesting. You know, this is why I think true crime is fascinates a lot of people. As frustrating as it is, we still have a murder. We've got 3, possibly 4 subjects. Like I said,
it's still a cold case, isn't it?
It's still a cold case.
Yeah.
You know, like I said.
According to modern standards.
Yes, it's still a cold case.
Of treating homicide as with no eye on statute of limitations. Basically, there is no statute of limitations on felony murder. So, yeah, it's still an open case, honestly. So, and if anybody out there has got details,
But yeah, I mean, let's take Kavanaugh off the board, both of them, because
Okay.
my gut's telling me it's the same guy. It's just one record put it down as a C, another record put it down as a K,
Right.
because a lot of the story sounds the same for both of them. No, the one with the C is listed as mentally ill, the one with K wasn't, but there was a lot of similar overlap between the stories. So I'm going to say that's the same guy. We're going to take him off the board. So that leaves Lent and Strickler.
Yeah.
How plausible that one or both of them did it? I mean, based on...
Well, the only thing that places them at the scene of the crime is their own admissions.
And people
their
see them in
affidavits.
Catskill afterward.
And yes, and the eyewitnesses see them afterward.
But that was afterwards. I mean, the boat being stolen, it was stolen that night.
Yeah.
Where are the other two guys that deserted with them?
Yeah.
Could they have been the murderers and they were covering for him for some reason?
I don't know. Perhaps they wanted to... Perhaps she caught sight of them. They were afraid that she might report back to the military about their desertion and decided to murder her then. That would be motive.
That would
for
be
murder.
motive, yes. Yeah.
Okay. To leave no witnesses.
Because it sounds to me, she's 300, not that far from her house when she disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
Her friends just left her. It's not like she was out walking in the lone woods by herself.
No.
No, she was
And
in
we're
a
talking
populated area.
Well, yeah. Where there aren't a whole lot of murders.
Right.
So you think it would be more of a sensational thing. You'd think people at the time would have taken more time.
Yeah.
And she was well liked. She
Yes.
didn't have any enemies.
No, that's
according
one thing.
to the accounts.
That's one thing that did come up. She was very well liked, and like she came from a good family.
Yeah.
That's why it surprises me. I could not find one contemporary newspaper article, at least the ones that have been digitized and available online.
What can we derive from that then?
That's what makes this one hard to talk about, because so much of it was written 40 years to 50 years afterwards. And a good example, let me give you an example of why this is hard. This is from the Osseo Herald. Okay, now this one's a little closer. This is only 7 years later, but still, you understand there's a times gap here.
Mm-hmm.
This was written January 17th, 1820. We recount but one case parallel to foregoing. They were talking about a current murder case in Osseo at the time. In the fall of 1817, a man was tried at Catskill for the murder of Miss Sally Hamilton several years before at Athens. The principal witness against him was a man who pretended to be his accomplice, and there were several strong circumstances against the prisoner, and the witness, a stranger that part, detailed the particulars and situations seen in the murder and the adjacent village and surrounding country, etc., with a precision and confidence which astonished everyone present. On cross-examination by the village councillor Eliza Williams, Esquire, the innocence of the prisoner and the rank of perjury of the witness became apparent, and the prisoner was acquitted. They never mention who these two guys were. They could be Lee and Strickler. And I think a lot of people assume that's who it is. Did I say Lee? I did say Lee. Oops.
So, yeah, as you can hear, we're still trying to get this one straight.
Yes. I meant Lent and Strickler.
Ever since
And I keep calling Strickler Strickland.
1813.
All right. Never mentions who those two guys were.
Right.
So that could be them. So yes, they probably do have the strongest case against them.
Uh-huh.
Did they act on their own? Where were the other two guys they deserted with?
Yeah, because we're talking about
four people left, and
four
then you
deserters.
get the wrench in the works when the military showing up. No, they were there.
Well, these two guys who say you've gotten
attendance.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, this case is really a tough one. It's interesting. I mean, I think true crime people could jump on this and have a ball with it. Trying to dig out everything.
It's just find its way on this program because
of Murderers Creek.
Murderers Creek and the possibility of any ghosts or any sort of phenomenon going on around the bridge.
There
perhaps?
is. I saw a haunted walk being offered, but they're the type of haunted walk where it goes into the history of the place, so it's not really like, ooh, here's a ghost. It just explains this spooky. That.
Rather like that walk we had in Rhode Island, in Providence, about Herbert Lovecraft.
Oh, yeah, that was a great
which
walk.
was an eye-opener in some respects.
I highly recommend it if you've read H.P.
yeah.
Lovecraft. Go to Providence and take one of the walks if they ever offer it. because the Shunned House, oh yeah.
Shunned House.
In fact, I worked right next to one of the cemeteries that featured prominently in one of his short stories.
Yes.
And believe me, I thought about that every time I left the business. It was like, I could almost imagine the scene in the story.
Absolutely.
It was the unspeakable thing, So.
And discovering that the unsettling existence of the actual Innsmouth look.
Oh, we're going down that rabbit hole now. Okay.
Well, we are talking about the supernatural here, so
yeah. But anyway, going back to New York, this is what makes true crime, even as old as this, kind of infuriating, because you're like, you got almost all the puzzle pieces together. And even though that one written in 1817, it's 1820, sorry, it doesn't mention the people by name. So was it Lenton Strickler? I don't know.
It's still open, folks, and if you've got any details, if you're the kind of person who likes to dig up true crime, a lot of the sort of rank amateurs that we watch on YouTube and other services. Don't mean to plug just one,
right?
But there's so many alternative platforms out there right now. Okay. If you've got access to more information, please,
and I just
help
found
us catch up on
this
case.
And I just found something else that kind of throws everything for the. Her date of death is August 15th, 1813 on the gravestone. According to this book written in 1867, again years later, her death was supposedly in July.
It's like people are. Was this murder so unusual? That people just couldn't get their story straight.
Right. This goes into highlight detail of her death. Ooh, her skull and cheekbones. I'm just going to go over it quickly. Her skull and cheekbones were broken, so the crushed head, like we described. Her hands were injured, and there were blows upon her breasts. According to this recounting, again, 50-some years after.
Probably some broken ribs with that, too.
Yeah, somebody did hear a cry of a woman, but never investigated it. Again, 50 years after, so how much is this really? Apparently there were blood all over the bridge, but...
Who said that?
Apparently, that's this recounting. Again, how much of that's been embellished, though?
Exactly. And we've got no sources for all these details.
Exactly. But if this one's true about the recounting of her injuries, that's probably more like what you were saying. She stumbled upon the deserters, they panicked.
Yeah.
Because it sounds like they beat her and she's trying to protect herself. That's probably why her hands were injured.
Right.
And they're hitting her head and her chest area. And now, a couple of reports said she was sexually assaulted or it was a hint of sexual assault. But this one report says nothing in that manner. In fact, it mentions those were her only injuries. There's a lot to there's a lot of who said what, when they said it. Boy, if I could have found one newspaper article from 1813, it would have made so much nicer. But
actually, it just goes to show that people who desert under stressful circumstances aren't forward thinkers.
No.
And they might have thought, if they had their heads about them, they might have decided to take her with them. And then release her at some point where they could not be reapprehended by the military. Right. And then,
I wonder why they went to New York. I know we were at war with Canada at that time, but it would have looked for them up there.
Yeah, it just goes to show that they just don't know how to think ahead.
Yeah.
And
I mean, they could have disappeared into central New York. Who would have looked?
The whole desertion was probably a spur of the moment thing to begin with.
True.
And you're working off that adrenaline rush. Because, folks, we're talking about a time, 1813, execution by firing squad for desertion wasn't eliminated. There was no moratorium on it, so to speak, from a military standpoint, until after the First World War. Right up to that point. And so the stakes were high for these guys. And so, if somebody were to, at least they faced a really severe whipping, at least. I mean, particularly if this was their first offense and the unit was short on hands, that probably would have just given them a really severe whipping, perhaps. But that might have counted in the hundreds of lashings. Right. And so the stakes were still high. Either way, you were facing, as a deserter, a lot of pain. Pain. Lots of pain. Which was probably motivation for murder.
Right.
so that they'll get rid of the witness and be able to go on their merry way.
So, surprisingly, we did talk a lot about this, so I guess we are going to do a two-parter. Mm-hmm. So, the Murder Creek Part 2 will be our next episode. And just keep in mind, there are a lot of similarities. Just to give you a little taste of the next one we're going to talk about. It's all murders are bad, but this one has a lot more tragedy to it, and it's a far more modern one, and I think it's one of these that a true crime people would just love to get their hands on. The one coming up, the murderer was caught, and we will get into that.
To recap the name and places.
This was Murder Creek in Athens, New York, and now known as Mudder's Kill or Mudder's Kill. Prior, so Muddy Creek or Mother's Creek, prior to it being known as Murder's Kill. And there you go. And I can recite only that the Middle English that I did. That's in my only Middle English. So wrapping this up. All right.
We're still very sorry about the family's loss.
Yes.
Of their family member.
She does have Sally Hamilton does have a grave. If you go to findagrave.com, you can leave a virtual.
We still, even though we're still very sorry about Sally. All right. It was wrong what happened to her, and we'll see in the next episode about the next murder.
About the next Murderers Creek, which is on the opposite side of the state. All right.
Thank you for listening to our ghastly podcast.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Unearthly Upstate. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Patreon, and on our webpage. We are also on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Spreaker, Stitcher, Podbean, Google Podcasts, and CastBox. Please like, share, and review on your favorite platform. Unearthly Upstate is an Animator Liar production. The show is produced by Mari and Matt Manette, with purring provided by Honey and Lloyd. Research and writing by Mari Manette. Music is by Kevin MacLeod, licensed under Creative Commons Attribution 3.0 license. Unless otherwise stated in the episode, the places mentioned in the broadcast are not paid or contact us for any type of promotion. Please check out our webpage for credit and sources for the episode. Thank you.